The United States launches airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. While back at home, President Joe Biden faces opposition from both fellow Democrats and from Republicans as the administration pushes for infrastructure legislation. Hello, I'm Anand Knight, and this is The Heat. This weekend, the United States carried out airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. The targets, two Iranian-backed militias that, according to the Pentagon, had conducted drone attacks against American personnel in Iraq in recent weeks. It was the second time in 6 months that U.S. President Biden authorized strikes in Syria. Biden is also navigating a political maze to get an infrastructure and spending bill passed. To discuss all of this, let's bring in our panel. Here in Washington, D.C., Ameshia is a Democratic Party strategist and political analyst. Joseph Williams is the senior news editor for U.S. News and World Report. Rafael Bernal is a reporter for the political publication The Hill. And from New York, Jadan Horyn is a contributor for the Metropolitan magazine. Welcome to all of you. And Joseph Williams, let me start with you. The United States has bombed sites in Syria and Iraq. The U.S. invoked the doctrine of self-defense in justifying these strikes. But how does attacking positions in Syria and Iraq, Iraq being a U.S. ally as well, count as defensive actions?
Well, because in Syria, the U.S. forces have been under attack by apparently Iranian militias that are supposedly acting in proxy for the Iranian government. And this supposedly is in retaliation for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani back in January 2020. So the attacks on the U.S. Troops had been escalating, and therefore Biden felt like he had to take action against some of the structures that the militias, the Iranians, were getting their ammunition and their supplies from. So in an extended kind of metaphor, it is a bit of self-defense if you kind of squint. But certainly the Iranians view it as provocation. It's going to further complicate trying to get them back to the table over a deal. And even this evening, there have been reports of strikes against U.S. troops, rocket attacks against U.S. troops, no casualties, but certainly this is a tit-for-tat situation that is very, very dangerous, very, very volatile region of the country, and it's not good for anybody to have this happen.
Ameshia, as I said earlier on, in the 6 months that he's been president, this is the second strike ordered by President Biden on Syria. There are U.S. forces in Syria. Under what authority are these forces in Syria?
Well, at this point, I think what we just heard was actually true. There is and I think that we should have known that it was coming, there was going to be some retaliation against the Soleimani killing. But on top of that, we have a president who, even in the Obama administration, was not afraid to push go when it came to airstrikes. And I think that at this point, there is a need to show some type of authority, show some type of force. This is only the beginning of what I feel is going to be a certain level of escalation and tactics in the region. And Biden needs to show, and he is showing, that the U.S. is ready and showing a united front. We just saw him come back from the G7 summit. We saw all the conversation with the rest of the European world and European allies. But a lot of the backdrop of that conversation was also what is going on in the Middle East. And I don't think that it got elevated enough because of the conversations about what was going to happen or what was going to come out of the meeting with Putin. But I do think that we need to pay close attention to this, because this is one of many fires that President Biden has going on at the same time.
Yeah, but Ameshia, I'm wondering if this is a fire of his own making when it comes to President Biden or the presidents before him, because under what authority is the United States in Syria? There's no UN resolution. Syria did not attack the United States. So who gave the United States authority to put troops in Syria?
Well, I think that what we're seeing from President Biden, as well as presidents before him, was that authority wasn't necessarily something that was seen as needed. I think that at the end of the day, we're seeing, again, a president who feels as though there's destabilization across the region and that these airstrikes are going to prevent an escalation of violence. I don't necessarily agree with that, but we're going to see what happens in the coming weeks.
Jadan Horyn, what do you make of that? You know, the United States is constantly telling the world that the world has to obey by international rules, yet it seems to be breaking these rules here with impunity.
Well, the international community hasn't really taken the initiative on this issue. And, we can see that the UN has kind of abdicated its responsibility, especially when it comes to the refugees. I mean, we have to go back and look and say, we have Assad as essentially the dictator of Syria, and he has allowed and he has fought his own people and has committed what many term a genocide, and yet the international community has been silent. So the United States has stepped into the void, and I think we should applaud that. But at the same time, there are very grave errors that can be made, because we do know that Iran is here and they are acting with their agents in Syria and in Iraq, and we don't want to go back to the early 2000s of massive international entanglements.
Yeah, but the United States seems to be very selective in whose human rights it wants to protect, isn't it?
Well, certainly I think every country is very selective in what interests they want to pursue. Certainly there's a multitude of human rights violations across the world, but the United States, looks and sees what's in its geostrategic, interests and makes those decisions.
Good point.
I mean, I can't fault our nation's leaders for wanting to back up their allies in the region.
Yeah, it's a good point you make there, Jadan, because the United States, at these latest attacks that we saw, the United States attacked forces that are there in support of President Bashar al-Assad. President Assad, as well as these forces that are aligned with him, are fighting Islamic State. So when the attack from the United States takes place against these forces, aren't they helping Islamic State?
Well, this is, of course, one of the complications. We know that Republicans criticized former President Obama because Assad was allied with Russia. There was a potential for escalation. We know that in supporting or opposing certain factions in Syria could allow or enable ISIS, which at the time was, of course, growing, to take more land in Syria and Iraq and ultimately in Turkey. So I think when we deal with these issues, there's certainly going to be a multitude of complications where allies and foes are difficult to discern. And that's why, President Biden has to tread very carefully. And ultimately, he should go to Congress, because we really need, our body politic to weigh in on really this highly complicated, potentially very, very deadly entanglement.
Rafael, Bernal, does the United States have a Syria policy? I mean, what's the goal here? What's the end game?
Well, Syria right now, as your guests have said very well, is sort of the focal point of the Middle Eastern quagmire right now. So having an end game, if you're going into Syria, the end game has to come out with your, relatively unscathed. And the United States, what they're trying to do is contain the bad actors, which is a sort of a continuation of a policy they've had for decades at this point. It's unclear whether they can fully contain them, but maybe by containing the conflict into Syria, it can help allies like Iraq, like Israel. It can help, contain the Iranians in their own region. It's really strategically, it's kind of difficult to untangle, and because the goals going in were not clear, the goals about what it would take to get out of there are also unclear.
Now, the militias that were attacked say they will retaliate, and as Joseph Williams told us a moment ago, there are unconfirmed reports that there have been attacks against U.S. positions there. I mean, is there a risk that this could escalate into a wider conflict? Rafael?
The risk always exists in the Middle East, and I guess the risk, more broadly speaking, the risk exists in any shooting war, and you do have a shooting war, and you have great powers involved. Let's not forget Turkish involvement in the country, Russian involvement. You have the Iranians in there, and certainly interests of all of Syria's neighbors. So yes, it could get out of hand. Are there signs that it's going in that direction immediately? There don't seem to be signs of that, but you never know what the first spark is. So I agree with the rest of the panel. Biden has to tread very carefully here.
Okay, Joseph Williams, let's move on to another subject right now. That's the infrastructure bill. After reaching a compromise with intransigent Republicans, there is a bill that will be voted upon. Question is, Joseph, what did the Democrats have to give up to get Republican votes?
They had to give up a lot, including the definition of what infrastructure is. They put away from the table, they took off the table child care, fully paid child care. They took off infrastructure that is human infrastructure, that family leave, that credit went away. A whole myriad of things that they took off the table just to get this portion of the bill, which basically is what everybody agrees infrastructure actually is. We're talking about roads, bridges, power lines, sewer lines, that sort of thing. But what remains to be seen is whether or not the Democrats are going to be able to get a secondary package through on reconciliation votes alone that includes all the other goodies that they left on the table. And that does include child care, paid family leave, those sorts of things. They're going to try to get in a back-end kind of move without Republican votes. The problem here is that you've got to, Biden has to thread the needle very carefully between not just Republicans, but also moderates in his own party who believe the original bill was too expensive and who also believe that they need bipartisanship in order to get this thing done. But the progressive wing of the party, they're upset because those things were left on the table and because they are really kind of nervous about President Biden's commitment here, especially when he had to walk back his what seemed to be a very clear veto threat that tied both of those bills together.
So, Rafael, the strategy here on the part of the administration is to break these bills up into two parts, the one that has the support of the Republicans, the other one which the Democrats hope to pass on their own. That's the one that contains the human infrastructure, as Joseph mentioned, things like community college, climate change provisions, family care, and things like that. Initially, President Biden said that he won't sign the initial bill unless they come in tandem. That both of the bills have to be on his desk before he'll sign any of them. Then he walked that back over the weekend and said, well, no, he's prepared to sign the bills separately. Explain how this works and why the bills had to be broken up into two parts.
Well, the bills had to be broken up because sort of the social aspect, social infrastructure, let's call it that the Democrats wanted to add, very clearly things like child care, that the Republicans don't believe is infrastructure, simply wouldn't fit into a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It wouldn't get a single Republican vote. So they took all of that out. But the Democrats still have this other avenue where they can pass a lot of economic, really progressive policy wish list through reconciliation. They don't need Republicans. They just need 100% of Democrats on board in the Senate and very nearly 100% in the House. So they have these two avenues, and they're very comfortable with it. But by linking these two, Biden sort of gave the Republicans, and especially Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader McConnell, sort of gave them a say in the other bill. And he walked that back. It was a walk back that seems to have worked because senators like Rob Portman of Ohio are back on board with the bipartisan negotiation bill. But the other bill will be interesting because he will have to get Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders on board the same spending package. And, Bernie Sanders wants $6 trillion and Joe Manchin probably wants a smidgen over $1 trillion.
Jadan, Horyn, what's the Republican view on this, the breaking up of these bills, having two bills instead of one?
Well, the Biden administration is really seeking to have a victory. And, we know that Republicans squandered the opportunity under the Trump administration to overhaul infrastructure. And so now they're looking for an opportunity for a win. At the same time, the Biden administration is also looking for a win. So they understand why the president, who used to be and is a creature of the Senate, is looking to create these two tracks, separate bills, in order to have a win for the American people and a win for both parties. The Republicans really view this as kind of three parties are negotiating with the president. You have Senate Republicans, you have the moderates in the Senate, and then you have progressives who actually are not in the Senate besides Bernie Sanders. And they're mostly in the House, and they're the most restive, and they're the most skeptical of President Biden. And so Republicans are really hoping that this infrastructure bill is real, as the physical infrastructure bill, that is real and really does have the president's intent to sign and does have the ability for passage. But they see that, frankly, it's going to be a fight between the moderates that exist in the Senate and really the progressives in the House on the Democratic side about where the legacy of Biden's expanded liberalism goes. And they're going to stand on the sidelines, and they're certainly going to take winning talking point opportunities because Democrats are going to provide many to Republicans.
So, Jadan, how would Republicans respond if that second bill, the social infrastructure bill, if you like, or the human infrastructure bill, is passed just by using this parliamentary procedure known as reconciliation, where the Democrats don't need Republican votes at all?
Well, of course, Republicans are going to hem and holler, and we should expect them to do so. But at the same time, you know, we have to remember that there were threats of eliminating the filibuster in relation to this. So ultimately, the institution of the Senate and the protection of minority rights within the Senate will be preserved by this parliamentary trick, and that is very important, because if that is a valve, an important safety valve, reconciliation that is, for the majority to get what they want through, that is based on actual budgetary constraints and can be approved by the Senate parliamentarian, then in fact it is a legitimate bill. They'll fight against it. They'll say it's too much spending, increases the debt, et cetera. Those will be the talking points, but ultimately the institution and functioning of our country is not radically changed.
Ameshia, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party want a lot more done on human infrastructure. They want things like affordable housing put into their bill as well. In fact, as we just heard, Senator Bernie Sanders has been talking about a bill that is $6 trillion. But we know that there are members of the Democratic Party themselves, moderates, who say that that is not acceptable to them. There's the West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who says that he can't vote for something like that. So do you think these other provisions, these human infrastructure provisions, could ever get to become law?
The games that are being played in Washington right now, including the vocabulary around human infrastructure, social infrastructure, these aren't the same conversations that are being held in homes across America. 68% of President Biden's original proposal on infrastructure, including what y'all deemed as human infrastructure, has been approved by the American public. 68% of the public, that is left and right, actually wanted to see that happen. So this infighting that's happening right now in Congress is honestly just a push towards the midterms that we know are coming up, and Republicans not willing to move because they've already dug in their heels and said that they aren't going to basically approve of anything that Biden is trying to do here. But we have to be real about what's happening. When it comes to childcare, when it comes to elder care, when it comes to community college funding that actually helps to set individuals on track and to get them the skills necessary to actually fulfill those infrastructure jobs that this proposal would actually bring about, those are things that are essential. I do not agree with the separation of those priorities at all. One, because a standalone bill will also get killed by Republicans because they've never supported expanding child care access. They've never supported elder care access. They've also never supported what we see as education funding that actually helps to get our American population retooled and reskilled. So the issue here is more of one of partisanship at the federal level than it happens to be one of people on the ground who are the voting population who are actually against this or see it as ultra liberal or ultra progressive. Individuals across this country who have fallen by the wayside and have watched a shrinking middle class, who've been a part of the COVID-19 crisis and watched their small businesses disappear, who've watched industries completely collapse. They want to see the things that Joe Biden initially proposed. And I think that what we're seeing now is an infighting that was expected, but it's also one that does not serve the American public and the millions of people who came out and voted in 2020 because they wanted to see change. They wanted to have their issues finally risen to the top of the bill. They also, many of them women, wanted to finally see child care be taken seriously because the majority of the American workforce is women, and those women have children. And it becomes extremely hard to work a 40-hour plus work week, and some of these individuals have more than one job, and also not be able to afford child care. This is something that we need to take care of in this country, and it's something that simply cannot wait.
Rafael, Bernal, let's move on to the immigration issue, at the border, to be more specific. Vice President Kamala Harris did go to the border last week. This is what she had to say. Let's listen.
We have looked at a system where people have been housed in inhumane conditions over the last many years, an asylum system that has been broken and that needs to be reconstructed. And in 5 months, we've made progress, but there's still much more work to be done, but we've made progress.
Now, Rafael, the Vice President says that we've made progress in the 6 months that they've been in office, but there have been reports, the Associated Press has detailed grave conditions at one center where 250 children, including teenagers, are being held. They're being held without adequate food, water, or sanitation facilities, and some have been forced to eat uncooked food. This is happening under the Biden administration, not the previous one. What's going on there?
Well, they simply haven't managed to fix the deficiencies of the system. That goes beyond the Trump administration. The Trump administration, yes, did build a system that was to make it harder to implement the already poor structure of America's asylum system. They did make it worse in that sense. But it's not a structure that the Trump administration built. And the Biden administration has had some positive results. There's no doubt about that. There are fewer kids in the care of Customs and Border Protection, and more of them are going through the Office of Refugee Resettlement and into foster homes and final homes in the United States. So yeah, the numbers there do favor the Biden administration, but there's clearly a lot more work to be done. And the question is, do the legal structures of the asylum system really make it possible to achieve 100% success? How do you measure 100% success? Clearly, the last two administrations have measured that very differently. But there is clearly an intent to have an asylum and border management system that's based more on a humanitarian perspective than on raw numbers of having fewer people cross into the United States. The end goals are different now, and they're being implemented with flaws as per that AP report.
Joseph Williams, as Rafael says, there's a lot more to be done. In fact, there was a report released, or rather broadcast by the BBC last week, reporting on the conditions at the border, which it called heartbreaking, where disease is rampant and children are being sexually abused. What is the administration doing about this, and why has this been allowed to fester for so long?
Probably because we've had a change in administrations. I mean, it was easy to blame Donald Trump for a lot of these problems, and now that they're occurring on Joe Biden's watch, you don't see a lot of overt action like you did back when President Trump was in office, and it wasn't such a big catastrophe, or was a bigger catastrophe back then than there is now. Now, the bottom line here is that there's so much to be done and so many intractable problems. It's almost a Rubik's Cube to try to solve, because one of the main reasons why we have a flood of immigrants coming to the United States and flood of young people, despite the Trump administration's attempt to try to get them to dissuade them to come across the border in the first place, is because we have such intractable problems in Central America. We have corruption, we have political dysfunction, we have gangs, and people are coming here because they fear for their very lives, or they're faced with starving to death or earning zero income. Until those problems get fixed, the immigration problem is still going to continue to put pressure on American systems. The Biden administration say that there are fewer people coming north from Central America to the United States because of various and sundry policies, including some that he left intact, like remain in Mexico. But the bottom line is this problem is going to be a humanitarian problem, and it isn't being treated like a humanitarian problem because it's on the U.S.'s watch. We don't have a lot of international countries condemning the United States for those conditions, largely because there's a lot at stake for them to do that. So I think that it's a long-term solution. I don't think anybody's been able to grapple with it to any degree of success, and it's going to continue as long as we have the problems that are forcing people to come north.
Ameshia, the Democrats have control of both houses in Congress. They also have control, of course, of the White House. On his first day in office, President Biden sent an immigration bill to Congress. That was one of his campaign promises, and he was fulfilling that campaign promise. What became of that bill?
Well, just a little bit of clarification. Yes, Democrats do have control of the House and the Senate, but with extremely slim margins. This is not a runaway by any means. With that being said, Republicans don't support any type of immigration reform bill that is coming out of this White House. Honestly, they didn't support immigration reform bills that came out of George W. Bush's White House either, as a leading Republican. So I think that right now what we're seeing is a lot of infighting, but also strategically speaking, Republicans in many cases will say a lot of undue rhetoric, a lot of racist comments calling out Latino immigrants as rapists, murderers, all types of things with these really bad labels, and labeling them as criminals as well. But in addition to that, there is not a real forthright push. Aside from talking about building a wall, there is not a forthright push to punish some of the corporations, some of the different farming institutions and such that actually employ a lot of undocumented immigrants. And because there is a financial gain in many states that are conservative-led to have undocumented immigrants work or undocumented migrants work, we're never going to really see a strong and structural push from Republicans to do what they need to do to ensure that our immigration system is safe, accurate, and effective. That's just not going to happen. So yeah, that movement has just not been seen.
Jadan, it's all very well for Republicans to criticize the bill that Joe Biden sent to Congress or to reject any other proposals that Democrats are putting forward on immigration. But what is the Republican proposal on immigration?
Well, the Republican proposal really hasn't changed. It's stronger border security. But I think we need to take something really important from this, and that is that both parties exercise something called political expediency when it comes to immigration. It is a great talking point to both of their bases, and it is a great perpetual problem to allow to fester because it gets people galvanized. And the truth of the matter is that these detention centers existed under President Obama, they existed under President Trump, and now they exist under President Biden. There's abysmal humanitarian issues that I think all Americans should take seriously, the media should take seriously, and that we should really look at. The problems of immigration are great, and it's going to take both parties. Certainly Democrats have the ability with control right now to pass legislation should they want to do so, but Republicans need to get on board. Ultimately, we need a cohesive solution to this problem.
Judge Williams, very quickly, one last point I want to talk about, and that is Derek Chauvin, the white policeman who killed George Floyd, a black man. He was sentenced to 22.5 years last week. Many say the sentence was too lenient. What have you been hearing?
I've been hearing that across the board, that it was too lenient given the egregious nature of the crime and given the fact that this was, by all accounts, a deliberate act that cost this man his life, not an accidental use of force, not a I feared for my life kind of situation like we normally hear in police shootings. That being said, the fact that he got convicted at all, many people are saying proves that we've had progress on this issue, given the fact that we've had other police shootings that have not garnered nearly as much attention or haven't even resulted in the arrest of officers. So while the sentence was a disappointment, it does point to some motion forward that we are taking these things seriously and that officers will be held to account, if not now, then certainly going forward.
Okay, and we have to end it there. Thanks for a great conversation to all of you. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.